Hello, hello, and welcome to season 2 of Found in Interpretation podcast. Welcome. It's 2025. Once again, I'm one of your co-hosts, Alain Breton, and I'm here with Brian. Brian, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm ready for 2025. It's going to be a great year.
Okay, so here we're starting the year with Dr. Marie-Hélène Girard. So, Dr. Marie-Hélène Girard is Assistant Professor of Legal Translation and Jury Linguistics, graduate diploma in Legal Translation, McGill University, Canada. She was or is a lecturer at the University of Montreal. Okay, and a research assistant at the University of Geneva in Switzerland. Professional experience in in-house translator and a freelance translator for 15 years, serving corporate, institutional, and public sector clients. She is also a specialist in jury linguistics and artificial intelligence, and she is here to tell us about her research. So, Marie-Hélène, why can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yes, thank you for the invite. I have many research projects going on right now with the justice sector in Canada about legal language professions. But one in particular concerns interpreters in Canada in the public sector. And so this research is to find out more about the shortage of legal translators and interpreters in Canada. We've been hearing since at least 2009, there's been reports from the justice sector that there's shortage, and again in 2016. And now we're really hitting a wall with, the older interpreters, legal translators retiring. And we're still talking about shortage, but we don't have data. We don't know how many interpreters we need, where, how. And also we hear from the association that there's enough translators, there's enough interpreters. So how come there's no link between the two, between people who are available to do translation, legal translation and interpretation, and then the jobs that are not filled? So we decided to do a research. There's two parts of the research. One of them is a survey. So we want to survey the people doing legal translation and interpretation to find out about their level of satisfaction with their work and why did they decide to become interpreters in the first place? What are the factors that make them decide to choose this as a career? Or was it just by pure luck that they ended up being interpreters? That's what we hear. So many questions. We can answer those questions later.
Yes. Actually, I do have a question because when I think about legal translation, but in our case, more like interpretation, there are several categories. It could be directly at the courthouse. It could be a work for the government. It could be consecutive interpretation. It could be simultaneous interpretation. There are several categories. It depends on the language combination. Is it about official languages? It is managed by provincial bodies. So what specific, are you looking at the overall market or something a bit more specific? Because a lot of things are coming into mind right now.
Yes, and we know that, and this research could go in so many directions afterwards, but because this is the first exploratory research, so okay, let's go wide. Let's not look only at parliamentary interpretation or court interpretation, so we decided to keep it broad for now. Not ask those specific questions in a survey, but we do focus on official languages for this survey because it's funded by the justice sector. So there's a need for both official languages, interpretation and legal translation. So we're focusing on official languages for now and on the public sector.
Okay. And when you're saying funded by the justice sector, is that the Ministry of Justice, or is it the legal?
It's a fund it's called Access to Justice and Both Official Languages Support Fund. So it's a fund that is managed by Justice Canada.
I see. Okay. Yeah, because you're right about the shortage. We hear about it all the time. Even at the federal government level, there's a shortage of interpreters. From what we heard from season one, there was a big emphasis on this podcast too about it, and how there aren't enough interpreters to even allow the government to function properly. So, going into the legal world, would assume it would be the same situation. So it's great that you're doing this survey. I think. What from in terms of like being on the podcast and getting the message out, is it a message to legal and translators and interpreters to complete the survey, or is this basically the goal of today, so that we can maybe like in the description of the podcast we can add like the links and all that stuff so that to help you out?
Yes, definitely. That would be great if you could promote the survey, provide the link to your audience. And we need to get as much information as possible from interpreters. We do already have a lot of answers from legal translators, but it's harder to reach interpreters. Or at least our network doesn't include that many interpreters, and I'm sure your network does. And it's really important to hear from as many interpreters as possible that works in as many contexts and as many provinces and territories as possible, because we really want to have an overview of what's going on in Canada, and if there's places that they struggle more with the shortage, and also find out what are your input. What do you think? Why is it not working? What are the challenge? What would you do if you were a politician and writing policies? And what's missing? Is it training? Is it visibility? Is it better work conditions? So these are things that we ask you in this survey.
But I would say that, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is, first of all, and being an interpreter it's a specialty. And legal interpretation is a specialty inside of a specialty. So not only you must have the skills of an interpreter, but also the knowledge, because I think that the legal interpreting market can seem quite intimidating for a lot of people, even for seasoned interpreters. If you're not used with, sometimes in court, you could use consecutive interpretation. Many interpreters do not want to do consecutive. And then you need to maybe go to university, or maybe you can teach yourself a lot of the legal terminology. So I think that may be one of the reasons. What have you heard so far from interpreters? If you have, only very few, I think, from what you're saying.
Yeah, only few, and we haven't analyzed the data yet. So maybe I can come back on the podcast at a later time when we have the data and we can discuss the data. Now we're in collecting the data. So it's really nice to hear from you. I can tell you, though, from the legal translation perspective, because it's more or less the same. You do need that specialization in law, and you need to understand the law to translate the law. But there's no organism that oversees who can be a legal translator or not, who can translate the law or not. So there's many ways to acquire that specialization. So you said someone can just auto-teach themselves, so do the research, the reading, and then they feel comfortable with it. Or some people decide to do an entire undergraduate program in law. But in my opinion, it's not necessary to do the entire program in law to be qualified to translate or interpret the law. You do need to have some understanding on how the legal systems are organized, the different branches, the main concept and so on, but it's not necessary to be able to write laws or do the full degree in law. So
you don't need to do the bar exam in order to become a translator or an interpreter.
Exactly. Same, people doing translating for engineering, they don't need to be making engine to translate text in engineering fields.
Absolutely,
So same for law, same for translating the law and interpreting the law.
Yeah.
So But you do need to have the confidence. So sometimes we lack that as translator. I don't know for interpreters, but as translator, we do lack the confidence. But we do have the skill to do the research and go to the bottom of things.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's yeah.
And I mean, I will admit that I'm a self-taught legal interpreter,
There you go.
because I already had the skills as an interpreter, but a lot of my clients are institutes and associations that are in the legal profession, like training for judges,
Yeah.
lawyers, and that kind of thing. So yes, I did have to self-teach myself a lot of the legal aspects, and I'm just wondering if maybe that's one of the reasons why there's this divergence of ideas as to one group says that there isn't a shortage and the other one says that there is. Maybe like just because there's already a fund that automatically goes into their professional development to have interpretation. So it's kind of like behind the scenes. Oh yeah, it's like a fait acquis. Like it's already taken for granted that there's going to be interpretation at courses and at conferences and all this stuff. Like they don't even have to. Judges and lawyers don't even have to worry about that aspect. I wonder if that would play a role into how it's perceived, because there's automatically interpreters or simultaneous conference interpreters whenever there's a professional development or conference happening in the legal world.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of education that we need to do with our clients and people that require translation and interpretation as well. I do get email all the time from people organizing conferences at university, and they need interpretation, and they reach out to me because they think translation is the same as interpretation, and anyone who's bilingual can do it. So there is that too. We need to promote our professions better. This is the role of the Alliance as well, eventually. And so this survey is also a tool for us to create an action plan. So what can be done to better promote the professions? And then we'll go back to our sponsor and present the plan and maybe get some more funds to be able to do that. And raise visibility and awareness.
Now, do you know how many legal translators already work for in the federal government, like as employees?
For legal translation, I know the Federal Bureau of Translation, there are something like 600 translators. I don't know how many do specifically legal translations.
Oh, I wonder if there's a way to find that out so that you would know on the government side.
Yeah,
how many
exactly.
there are.
So that's the second part of the study. So we're surveying the translators, the interpreters, but we're also doing interviews with employers. We want to find out exactly how many legal translators they have, how many jobs are available for how long, how hard is it to recruit, what are the conditions, what are the salaries, and so on. So we'll have both sides.
That sounds like a huge endeavor, because I'm assuming you'll also have to go to like the bigger law firms too, and because they probably have in-house translators as well, right?
That's why right now we're focusing on the public sector only, because if we open it to the private sector as well, this is endless, and we would have to go to law firms, etc. So right now we're focusing on the Bureau of Translation, the different governments, provincial, territorial governments. New Brunswick, they have the Bureau of Translation as well. Manitoba. So we'll try to interview one main employers of legal translators and interpreters by province and territories.
Cool. Alain, I think I interrupted you.
Yes.
You had a question.
I was thinking about so many things at the same time here. Because I see when I think about legal translation or interpretation, rather, in our case, I always have those two main branches in mind, which is we meet some of our friends, Brian and I are interpreters who do court interpretation. For instance, I know some in Ontario that do court interpretation, and the working conditions are very different. First of all, from province to province, and then different when you're doing a more of a conference style. Sometimes I'm being asked also to go to court, but I do it virtually, more in a conference context rather than, let's say, interacting with an accused. So it seems so broad, and I'm really, if I had a hint, I would say that first of all, the besides the specialization inside the specialization, I would say that the working conditions and salaries would would be an issue. I'm not sure. I haven't checked in the last few years, but I remember maybe 6 or 7 years ago when I was just looking into it. I think it was something like $30 an hour or something like that, which is not high compared to a usual rate for an interpreter. Have you heard of anything like that?
Yes, I did. And for a few years now, I've been approached to develop the program for interpretation at McGill. And I keep saying people will not sign up for this program and pay this much money for this program when you only pay them this much afterwards. It doesn't make sense. So there's also like maybe there's a work to be done on the ministry side, on the employer side, to raise the condition, raise the salary, but then have some requirements like a diploma or something in translation and interpretation. And that's why I also work with the provincial, territorial, and federal government. I do what's called impact research. So I don't do research just to have data and then send them out there and write some scientific paper. My goal is really to provide data that is useful.
Who will read it?
Hmm?
Who will read the report at the end?
Well, Justice Canada to start with, because this is our
Let's hope so, because they're
funder.
paying.
The what?
Let's hope so, because they're paying.
Yeah, exactly. So Justice Canada to start with, but we also do a knowledge mobilization. So once we provide the data to the funder, then we say, okay, now we have this data. What can be done now? What will you be doing with this? So in this type of impact research, the goal is to help policymakers make decisions, provide them with the scientific data, not just market research that sometimes just align with a specific goal. So hopefully this research will help point to some problem in the industry that needs to be resolved so that we can attract more people to do legal translation and court interpretation and interpretation in general.
Yeah, because like along the same lines as Alain, pre-COVID, like maybe 2018, 2019, I met with the Court Interpreters Association of Ontario, a couple of their members of their board of directors, and they were. I organized a meeting between them and one of the big private sector unions in Canada to see if maybe there was a possibility to unionize these court interpreters to have a better voice so that they can raise their working conditions and their salaries, because that's the number one complaint that came from that association. I know that they were going to do some internal lobbying with the provincial government, but COVID happened, and then I'm not sure what happened after that. But my assumption is that the working conditions and the salaries haven't improved drastically. And a lot of our colleagues that do court interpretation end up doing conference interpretation because it pays better and the working conditions are better. So yeah, I would one of the big pushes, I think, in attracting more people would probably be to change those two core aspects of the profession.
And that's why we need more answer from interpreters to have a mass of data to be able to see, well, we have so many interpreters that answer this survey and 90% of them said salary is a problem. So you want more interpreters? There's a problem? Well, here's a solution. There's something we need to work on.
They're expected to do kind of the same work as the lawyer, but in the other language. So there's these judges that are getting paid a nice salary. The lawyers are getting paid a nice salary, but then the interpreter is getting paid $30 an hour. So you have to raise the rates and the working conditions for the interpreters to meet what is required of them.
Well, I would say
Definitely.
When I was looking into it, I was really wondering actually why there's such a disparity. Because if people say, well, it's because you have to work for the government or the Ministry of Justice. Well, I know that the provincial or federal government can pay conference interpreters quite well for their work, what it's due. And I'm wondering, why is there such a gap? And we're talking at least 10 times more when
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
for work that is I think that being in court and being in that setting, there's a lot at stake. It's very stressful. You don't want to misinterpret something. If you're in a conference and you miss maybe a sentence or a word here and there, you can always catch up. But if there's a stenographer writing what you're saying, it's completely different, and somebody could get wrongly accused if you screw up. So there's so much on the line that maybe a combination of not being well paid and the stress of doing such important work could actually be one of the sources of the issue here.
Definitely. Last time I saw a job posting for the Justice Department in Quebec, so court interpreting for the Quebec courts, their requirements was a high school diploma, not more than that.
What?
Yes.
High school diploma?
Yeah, nothing more than this. And so so they
Is it because
give
they're
20,
desperate and they want
$30.
anyone?
Maybe it was not just for official languages, it was for other languages as well. But how can you sustain offering services in one's
My
preferred
son is
language?
finishing secondaire in June.
She
I'll
could
tell
be an
him.
interpreter.
He should be an interpreter. Yeah, I should tell him. Yeah.
But to your point of the mistakes can have huge consequences. When I did my master, I looked into the concept of genocide, and I looked into the first trial for a genocider here in Canada, and I looked at both the translation of the concept of genocide into the Canadian law, and also the interpretation in the case of this person. His name is Munianissa. And then there was some things that came up during the trial. The interpreter was interpreting that the sorry,
we all make the mistake.
yes,
Even we say sometimes translating and we're
yes,
interpreting.
there you go. So the interpreter was saying that he was hit with a stick, and then a few days later they came back on this testimonial, and then turns out it was not just a stick; it was a stick with nails. It's different. Like, it's a world of, the brutality of the act. A stick, okay, it's violent, but a stick with nail,
Oh my God, yeah.
the intention is very different here. So
Absolutely, yeah.
the stakes are high, and
yeah.
there's question of ethics and involved in all this. You guys know.
Yeah, well, I think it was a month ago, or maybe even 2 months ago, we had someone from the International Criminal Court, an interpreter.
Yes. Yeah.
And they were. That's all they do is war crimes, genocide, that kind of thing. And it's having le mot juste is so important in that context. But and it's one of the highest courts in the world. But even at the level of even just the family court cases, it's. I did a conference once where one of the judges described our the job of being a judge and a lawyer and being in that setting as very violent, in the sense that, like, you're determining someone's life, the verdict in their life. How much time are they going to serve in jail? How much time or how much money do they have to allocate to child support when they're struggling financially already? Like, there's a lot of different things that are at stake in courts, and having the right word is so important. So I think that, yeah, you do need that combination of the training, that maybe not the equivalent of what a judge or a lawyer would be trained at, but yeah, you do need a good amount of training. You need to maybe even be paid for the prep work, and have prior knowledge to what you're going to be dealing with, so that you can do a better job. And obviously the remuneration.
Well, I think that in life, I know it's not the only criteria here, but I think that um, th- there should be a correlation between the level of risk and remuneration. What you get if what you're doing is risky, you get paid more usually. If it's important and risky, not only risky, but important and risky. And when you're in court, it's extremely important and it's extremely risky, especially for the accused.
Yeah, you have
or for the victim.
You have someone else's life in your hands, basically.
So, actually, working conditions is really something that we have to look into.
Yeah, and I know, like for conference interpreting, there is a bit of a focus on consecutive interpretation, but it's mostly in the real life professional setting. It's almost always simultaneous interpretation, and in court interpretation, it's a real mix of both. So it's even more training as an interpreter as well.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
So,
I remember when I was doing my, I did actually a core, two, if I remember correctly, two court interpretation courses in my first year at Glendon. And basically, for instance, we had to hear a whole story of, let's say, a pickup truck at 2 a.m. that hit a lady on the side of the street, and the pickup truck was blue, and the license plate and everything. And as an interpreter, you have to write all of that. And I'm sure that when you're in court, you can't necessarily say, "Oh, sorry, can you repeat that again?" Or "I haven't heard you well," or something.
My pen stopped working.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
definitely.
So is the goal of this research to improve access to justice in a way as well?
Yeah, in both official languages, which mainly means French outside of Quebec and English in Quebec in the context of Justice Canada. So yes, the goal for us is to come up with an action plan for future activity of the Alliance to raise awareness, to bring more people to job and to the program, train more people, raise awareness too. So, talking with people just gives me a lot of idea, Why don't we put the judges and the prosecutor and the lawyers in the seat of interpreters, just so that they understand how hard it is? That would be something interesting, do workshop in courts with these actors, and just so that they understand what's at stake here. So that would be a good idea.
I often tell my friends, if you really want to know what we do as simultaneous conference interpreters, go put on the news and try to repeat in the same language what they're saying for like maybe 5-10 minutes and see how you feel after.
Yeah. I have one experience with interpretation, and that was awful. Awful. That was a forum social, and because I was studying in translation, they said, "Okay, you do the interpretation." It was interpretation into English, and it was about economy, and
oh my goodness,
was awful.
I'm excited. I want to do it now.
No.
Yes, send us.
Yeah, that's yeah. I hear that. I'm like, oh, really? Tell me more.
It sounds so interesting. We're fascinated.
Yeah, already. I'm like. So, but I think I heard you well earlier. McGill offers an interpreting course for court interpretation. Did you say something like that?
No,
earlier?
we were asked to develop. We were approached, and there was some talk about maybe developing a program for interpretation at McGill. Higher education, so continuing education for people who already do other things, and but yeah, we never went ahead with this project.
And so the other two universities that are involved?
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Sorry?
The other two universities that are involved in the project?
In the Alliance. So there's Université Sainte-Anne in Halifax. They offer a micro-credential in court interpretation, legal and court interpretation. Okay. It's online. And the other university is Saint Boniface in Manitoba. and they offer a major in legal translation within the translation program.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
And then McGill, it's
McGill, it's a graduate diploma in legal translation. So second, master
like a
degree.
master's.
It's a 30 credit program in, so it's legal translation, but really you learn to juggle with French, English, both legal system. We have an introduction to law for non-jurists as well. So our student, they are they already have, they're already legal translator, some of them, and they are bilingual legislative counsel, or they can become legal revisor as well. So there's other avenues. And it's legal translation is not an end necessarily
and to
for our
do a
student.
master's, do you need the bachelor's in translation beforehand, or?
So we have students coming from the translation world who have an undergrad diploma in translation and 10, 15 years experience in translation. And we also admit students with a background in law. So we admit both professional community, and we also admit on a case-by-case student with another background, people who studied in literature, language, political sciences, who've been doing translation for many, many years. Or have a strong background and interest, and pass the entrance examination. So we admit people from other fields as well.
But I feel that so far, and I hope that people in the audience, especially newer interpreters who might be listening, don't get the wrong impression about the legal profession and interpretation, because so far we've said that the working conditions are difficult, that the pay is not that high in certain areas, not in all of them. So we have to make sure that this is also a point that is well understood.
Yes.
And there are a lot of options out there. And I just want to be specific here. When I thought about some of the working conditions and some of the stress involved, I'm really talking about very specific setting when you're hired by the Ministry of Justice and you're doing a more provincial work directly at the courthouse, where there could be several languages involved, especially some not official languages, but minor languages. But when it comes to the market of official languages in Canada, especially because the official language market is well paid and well seen, and it's seen as more prestigious work, then the pay usually is higher. But it is also important to keep in mind that it is also very difficult work. So I want to be very clear, if someone is not familiar with legal interpretation, that what we're talking about here are very specific areas, but the market is a lot broader, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like again, pre-COVID, when I met some of the court interpreters in New Brunswick, they were telling me that they negotiate their own rates. So there is that, and then I think in Vancouver as well, they have they have an association that's very strong, and they negotiate good rates for court interpreters in general.
Is it more like, is it like a union you were talking about earlier, or
not a union? I don't think they're not allowed to be part of a union. So they have to be part of an association as court interpreters, because they're considered self-employed, and when you're considered self-employed, you're considered to be your own boss. So you can't be part of a union if you are your own boss. So that's why we try to see if we can improve working conditions and salaries for interpreters in Ontario by having them join a union, but it legally you can't do that. So we had to look for another solution, and then COVID hit, and then that kind of went on hold for until now, I guess.
But I think that the working conditions have improved, right, in Ontario.
I think so. Well, you and I were having dinner with an interpreter. He's a Spanish interpreter, so it's kind of outside of the scope of this. But he was saying that he does okay with court interpretation because he lives farther away and you get paid for travel. So he can take the GO train, let's say, and if he's also a legal translator, he can do translations. And then sometimes when he's at the court, all they need him for is, even though he's getting paid for a half day, they only need him for a specific block to be able to maybe it's just an introduction of the parties and it's just a few minutes, but he's got basically a half-day chunk at the courthouse where, again, he can continue doing translation work and subsidize more of his income and then take the train home again and then make a little bit more money. So it can become very lucrative if you're good at managing your time. It's just a question of that can't be your, right now in Ontario at least, I don't think it can be your sole source of income due to that.
We'll need to bring one to the podcast and they can tell us about it.
Yeah.
Tips and tricks.
I have a question regarding the survey. How many questions and how long does it take to fill? Because I'm sure that we're going to be posting the link, as we said before. But is it going to take an hour? People are a bit less busy at the beginning of the year, but then it becomes a bit crazier.
It's more or less 20 minutes, unless you have a lot to say. And we tend to, in legal translation and interpretation, we tend to write a lot. So maybe 20, 25 minutes.
Okay. So yeah. if you're taking the train to work, fill out the survey.
That's it.
Can you do you have it fill out on the computer? Can you fill it on your phone?
Oh, it's online. So
anywhere.
You just click on the link and you answer the survey. It's an online survey.
Are you also looking for interpreters that are not working in the legal interpreting field?
Right now, it's for court interpretation mostly, or legal interpretation, because it's within the justice sector area. Maybe at a later date we could survey.
No, I was thinking about that because if you wanted to know the reason why some interpreters are not going into legal interpretation as a specialization, so I thought that maybe there would have been a few questions regarding this aspect.
Well, the survey is not just for those who do that full time, and we do ask what's the percentage of your time that you spend doing legal translation or legal interpretation, because in a previous survey we found out that those that are legal language specialists in Canada do not necessarily do that full time, so it's one of their domain of specialty. So even someone who goes to court once or twice a month, we want to hear from you. And there is a question about why do you not do this more? So yes, please answer the survey, even if you don't do that full time.
I think this is a great initiative. I mean, I've interpreted a few times for Beverly McLaughlin, the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and now Justice Wagner. And they both, every time that I've interpreted for them, they've always emphasized the need for access to justice. There shouldn't be any barriers, and that should include language. That was just it wasn't a question. It was just a statement.
And so the result will be passed on to Justice Canada, but also to the provincial territorial government as well. They do participate in the fund and in the activities of Justice Canada as well when it comes to access to justice in both official languages. So they will be informed.
And going back to the provinces and territories, is it does the federal government have like a specific fund and then they allocate to each province how much they should be spending on that, or do you have any idea of how their structure works?
No, not specifically for the funds. I would not be able to answer that question, but I do say that I know that they fund initiatives throughout Canada to improve access to justice in French outside of Quebec and English in Quebec.
Mm-hmm.
And so if a ministry has an initiative and they want some funds, this falls under the purview of Justice Canada.
I see.
Any interpreters of other languages than French and English, can they also fill out this survey, or is it only for French-English combination?
We're focusing on both official languages right now, but again, if someone does it once in a while in both official languages, we welcome their answer as well.
And Creole?
Well, in the previous survey we did, so in 2020, when we launched the graduate diploma in legal translation at McGill, we had no idea of who was the market, who are the legal language specialists in Canada. So we did a similar survey back then, and we found that there was a huge community of interpreters that answered the survey, mostly in the rest of Canada. So there was legal translation, Ontario, Quebec, and the rest of Canada is mostly interpretation. And even when I did some field trips in BC, for example, they're like, I wanted to talk to legal translators, and they're like, we don't do this here. So it was mostly interpretation, and mostly interpretation with other language than the both official languages. Yeah.
So I think you've inspired me to go back to the Court Interpreters Association of Ontario and maybe ask for a quick favor of them.
Yes, and you
and send
mentioned
them a link,
BC,
maybe.
New Brunswick. Yes, please pass on the survey,
Definitely.
the invitation. Thank you.
All right, so we'll have to share this survey. We will post it on the description below. And please come back and see us when you have the results. When do you expect them?
April, May.
Oh, so quick. So once you will gather all the information, it will take you about 2 or 3 months to write a report?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a lot faster than I expected.
And your colleagues, you mentioned that they know more about the program itself, right, in their own respective universities?
Yes, the program in interpretation in Halifax. Yes, if you want to find out more about them, please reach out.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Maybe we'll have to do a series of podcasts about this particular topic.
Yes.
Well, legal interpretation is so wide. As we were saying in the very beginning, that I understand the focus here on official languages in certain areas, but there are so many examples out there of different settings, situation, pay, and working conditions, and everything else, and by different provinces. 10 provinces, 3 territories. And I'm sure that if you talk to someone in the Northwest Territories that is dealing, let's say, with Indigenous languages up there in the North, I'm sure that they would have also a very different experience to share.
Yes, definitely. That's a good idea for the next research.
Yeah, especially, I mean, even out west, the incarceration rates for Indigenous populations is higher than any other demographic. So it'd be interesting to see also Indigenous languages on top of just English and French.
Yes.
Okay, so
that went by fast. I can't believe we're done.
I know. So we are at the end of our podcast. So I'll repeat it for the 5th time, maybe, that we're going to post at the bottom on the description to help this research. It is very important. It's crucial in Canada. We are a bilingual country. Yes, we are a country. Some people might say otherwise. And
what you mean?
yeah, I was saying. Okay, so thank you very much, Marie-Hélène, for participating in this podcast. It was a pleasure to meet you and greet you today. Brian, thanks again.
Yes, and thank you, Marie-Hélène, as well on my behalf as well. And your work is really important. And yeah, congratulations and keep up the good work. And yeah, I'm sure we will remain in touch.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. Like, share, subscribe. Good night and good luck.